The sirens were screaming, but they couldn't outrun the self-righteous wrath of an HOA president on a power trip. My daughter was dying just a few houses away while Karen stood in the middle of the road arguing about unauthorized vehicle access. If this story breaks your heart or makes your blood boil, like and subscribe so more people learn how power in the wrong hands can kill. It started with a cup of apple juice. That morning was like any other, filled with the kind of small, unremarkable moments that blur together until tragedy draws a red line through one. The sun was already shining in through the kitchen window, catching the edges of the countertop and casting golden shadows across the floor. Emily was sitting on her usual stool at the island, legs swinging as she waited for me to peel the seal off her favorite juice box. She wore her fuzzy blue pajamas, the ones with faded stars on them from too many washes. Her hair was a tangled mess that I'd soon comb into something that passed for a ponytail before school. "Don't forget the straw this time," she warned, squinting like a little boss. I laughed and handed her the apple juice with the straw already poked through. She grinned, satisfied, and took a big slurp. Her cheeks puffed out, then flattened with a loud swallow. "My name is Marcus. I'm a dad, a husband, a neighbor, or at least I was all of those things before one of them was taken away." That morning, we were running a little late. My wife, Jenna, had already left for work early, her nursing shift at the county hospital starting before sunrise. I was on solo school duty, which Emily and I had turned into our own kind of ritual. She'd get her juice and maybe a waffle, and we'd listen to music in the car on the way to Willow Lane Elementary, arguing over who got to pick the playlist. That day, she was going to make me listen to some animated unicorn song that had been stuck in her head all week. Our house sat on a modest lot in the kind of subdivision that looked like someone had copied and pasted the same blueprint 100 times. Oakwood Meadows. The name promised charm, maybe even trees, but delivered mostly concrete and beige. It wasn't bad, but it was tight. Every yard was trimmed down to a ruler's edge, every house practically touching the next. And in the middle of it all sat the Homeowners Association, an unblinking, ever-present force run by a woman named Karen Rutherford. Karen was the kind of person who seemed to breathe in control and exhale citations. She didn't knock on your door to talk, she issued notices. She believed firmly in order, in bylaws, in the sanctity of her printed clipboard. We'd had a few run-ins, nothing explosive. One time, she left a note about Emily's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Another, she gave us a warning because Jenna's sister had parked her car on the curb while visiting. She once fined a neighbor for hanging beach towels over their balcony rail. Karen always claimed it was about preserving the standards of the community, though I could never quite figure out whose standards she meant. Still, we lived with it. You sort of had to, unless you wanted to rack up fines or be publicly shamed at an HOA meeting for allowing a hummingbird feeder too close to your neighbor's line of sight. Karen had the support of enough residents to keep her in power year after year. People feared her, or at least wanted to stay out of her crosshairs. She had this brittle, icy smile that never quite reached her eyes. The kind of smile that said, "I know the rules, and I know you broke them." But none of that mattered that morning. That morning I was just trying to get my daughter to eat something before school. She finished her juice and asked for half a waffle. I tossed it in the toaster and leaned against the counter, scrolling my email out of habit. That's when I heard her fork clatter. At first I thought she'd dropped it, but when I looked up, she was stiff. Her small hands trembled, still clutching the edge of the plate. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, her mouth parting slightly like she was about to say something but couldn't find the air. "Emily," I said. The word came out louder than I intended. I rushed around the counter and caught her just as her body jerked to the side, her limbs flailing in a terrifying rhythm. She collapsed into my arms, convulsing violently. I laid her down carefully, heart thundering, mind scrambling through what to do. We had dealt with seizures before. She had been diagnosed with a pediatric seizure disorder the year before, and while we had hoped it would fade with age, the episodes had returned in recent months with more aggression. Usually they lasted under a minute, and her neurologist said that as long as we kept her calm and safe during them, she'd recover quickly. We had a rescue medication, but this time I could tell it was different. Something about the way her back arched, the way her lips started to tint blue at the corners. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. The call connected quickly, and I told them what was happening, where we lived, everything. I could barely keep my voice from cracking. The dispatcher was calm, professional. She said paramedics were on their way and asked if I had the emergency medication. I did. I administered it while she talked me through it. But Emily didn't slow down. 2 minutes passed, then 3. The dispatcher assured me help would be there any moment. I ran to the front door, flung it open, and looked down the street. Nothing yet. I went back to Emily, whispering to her, telling her to hold on. Her little chest moved unevenly, her eyes still fluttering. A minute later, I heard it. Sirens, faint but growing louder, then abruptly near. They had arrived. Relief flooded me, mixed with desperation. I ran to the door again, ready to flag them down, but they weren't at our driveway. I heard the engine, the siren pulsing, but it wasn't approaching. It was stuck. I rushed outside, barefoot, and looked toward the front of the subdivision. That's when I saw the ambulance and white lights flashing, idling at the closed security gate at the front of Oakwood Meadows. And standing directly in front of it, arms crossed, was Karen. I thought, for one horrible moment, that maybe she was there to help direct them in, to open the gate. But she wasn't moving. She was arguing. My stomach dropped. My brain struggled to make sense of the scene. Emily was inside, seizing and possibly dying, and Karen was blocking the only way the ambulance could reach her. At that moment, I didn't care about bylaws or authority or whatever excuse she could manufacture. I bolted down the street, screaming her name, praying to any power that would listen that I wasn't already too late. Karen Rutherford had not always been a tyrant, at least not openly. When we moved into Oakwood Meadows 3 years earlier, she introduced herself with a plate of oatmeal cookies and a firm handshake. Her smile was tight and deliberate, her eyes scanning our living room as if mentally cataloguing every piece of furniture within sight. At the time, I thought she was simply the kind of neighbor who liked to know everyone's business. It took a few weeks to realize she did not merely want to know it, she wanted to manage it. The first warning sign came when we received a printed notice on our doorstep about a non-compliant trash receptacle. The bin, which had been provided by the city, apparently violated HOA standards due to a faded sticker and a hairline crack on one side. It felt absurd, laughable, but I shrugged it off. I fixed it, replaced the bin, and chalked it up to a fluke. I had not yet learned that there were no flukes in Karen's world. There were only infractions. Karen rose to power in Oakwood Meadows the way mold creeps across bread, slowly, quietly, with an air of inevitability. Her husband, Tom, a stooped man with a head perpetually tilted toward the ground, rarely appeared without her. He did what she told him to do and smiled nervously when spoken to. Their house sat at the center of the subdivision on the corner lot, pristine to the point of sterility. Not a weed dared push through their mulch. Their mailbox gleamed like polished chrome. Even the welcome mat looked freshly vacuumed. Once she was elected HOA president uncontested, of course she wasted no time converting her authority into something greater than civic service. To her, it was law. She ordered repaintings, replantings, removals. She had the landscaping crew fired because one of the workers left muddy footprints on her driveway. When a teenager down the street set up a lemonade stand during a school break, she shut it down because it violated a clause about unauthorized commerce. Children's toys left outside overnight were grounds for written reprimands. Flags were only allowed during certain windows, and even then they had to be approved by a subcommittee. The American flag was permitted, but decorative garden flags with cartoon bees or inspirational quotes were removed without warning. People complained at first, quietly. They made jokes behind her back, muttered curses during HOA meetings, rolled their eyes when she passed by, but no one did anything. Partly because the rules were technically in the bylaws, even if most of them had been written decades earlier when the neighborhood was first constructed, but mostly because Karen fought like a bureaucrat. She knew how to exhaust you with paperwork, how to wield technicalities like blades. She cited section numbers, clause letters, enforcement schedules. She printed everything, catalogued it, backed it up in folders with color-coded tabs, and she did it all with the icy patience of someone who had nothing better to do. She used the HOA gate as both shield and sword. The entrance to Oakwood Meadows had once been open, accessible to visitors during the day. Karen had pushed through a rule requiring it to be locked at all times, citing increased foot traffic from surrounding neighborhoods and rising concerns about property security. In reality, crime had not increased. There had been one mailbox theft in the past 5 years, but fear made people pliable. Residents voted in favor of the change, and before long, the gate became a symbol of control. Emergency vehicles were supposed to have access codes, which Karen claimed had been properly distributed, but that did not stop her from monitoring who entered and when. There were days I saw her standing near the gate with her clipboard, timing the duration it took guests to enter codes, noting license plates. She insisted it was about safety, about vigilance, but it always felt like surveillance. I had my own run-ins with her. The chalk drawings Emily loved to make were one of the earliest points of friction. She had drawn a colourful, smiling sun on the sidewalk in front of our house one spring afternoon. I found a notice tucked into our door the next morning informing me that unauthorized modifications to common concrete surfaces were prohibited. I confronted Karen about it during a walk. She smiled that small, tight smile and said that while she appreciated Emily's artistic spirit, rules were rules. The following week, I received a citation for placing our recycling bin curbside too early in the evening. According to Karen, the approved window was no more than 2 hours before scheduled pickup. I apologized and promised to be more careful, but the warning still went into our file. Over time, I watched other families retreat inward. Fewer children played outside. Front yards became barren and lifeless. No one wanted to attract attention. Karen had established a regime not through violence or open hostility, but through constant pressure, always watching, always correcting. Jenna hated it even more than I did. She said Karen reminded her of the hospital administrator who once tried to suspend her for keeping a dying patient's family in a room past visiting hours. Technical authority, wielded without compassion, was something she had no patience for. We talked more than once about moving, but the school was good, and Emily had friends nearby. We told ourselves that the rules were just annoyances, nothing more, that we could live with them, until the rules became something else. About a month before everything happened, I remember Emily had a minor seizure at home. It was short, under 30 seconds. No need for the emergency med. Still, I called our pediatrician, just to be safe, and she advised us to watch her closely for the next 24 hours. A few hours later, a paramedic came by to check on Emily. It was routine, just a precaution. He parked outside the gate, entered using the emergency access code, and left within 20 minutes. The next morning I found a letter from the HOA in our mailbox. It said that non-resident medical personnel had entered the community without prior authorization. The ambulance, it claimed, had failed to check in with the HOA first, and such behavior could not be tolerated. Karen had signed it herself. I kept the letter. I wanted to show it to someone, to post it online and let people see what kind of neighborhood we lived in. But I didn't. I folded it and placed it in a drawer with the others. I think I wanted to believe it was all bluster, that if the worst ever truly happened, Karen would step aside, that rules would bend to reason, that somewhere behind the obsessive order lived a person capable of compassion. But I was wrong. When I saw her standing in front of that ambulance, when the sirens were blaring and Emily was lying motionless in our living room, I understood the truth. She was not enforcing rules. She was clinging to them like a throne. Her power came from obstruction, from control, from the knowledge that she could say no and make it stick. I shouted her name that day with a voice I did not recognize. I ran toward the gate, barefoot and breathless, my body filled with a kind of dread that words will never fully describe. And still, she did not move. Whatever mask of civility Karen once wore had long since cracked. All that remained was the unbending spine of a woman who had forgotten what rules were ever meant to protect. Emily had been fine the night before. Better than fine, really. She had been chatty, bouncing between her stuffed animals, assigning them voices and planning what she called a midnight picnic in the corner of her room. I had laughed as she explained how Bear was going to bring invisible sandwiches, while Owl provided emergency fruit, which apparently meant any fruit that could be eaten fast if someone showed up hungry but uninvited. She was a planner like that. Everything had a system, an idea, a purpose. She had been full of life. Jenna had come home from work exhausted but smiling when she heard Emily's giggles. We both sat on the edge of her bed while she explained the rules of the picnic in meticulous detail. Then we tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and turned off the lamp. Her little body curled under the covers. Her breath settled into the soft rhythm that always told me everything was okay. That night I stayed up later than I should have. I was working on a report for my job, something tedious and unfulfilling, but necessary. Around midnight I checked on Emily one last time. She was sprawled across the bed, hair like a halo against the pillow, one arm flung over her favorite plush rabbit. Everything looked peaceful. I did not know it would be the last time I would see her sleep. The next morning began with the usual shuffle of activity. I woke up a little late, kicked off the covers, and started rushing through my routine. Jenna had already left, her shift starting early again. She had whispered goodbye and kissed my shoulder before leaving, something she did whenever she didn't want to wake me. I barely remembered it, caught somewhere between dreams and the soft click of the door closing behind her. Emily was up already when I made it to the kitchen. She had poured her own cereal and was humming to herself while flipping through a picture book. Her feet swung off the side of the stool, not quite reaching the rungs. I tousled her hair and asked how she slept. She yawned, then declared she had dreamed of flying frogs. I made her toast, poured juice, and sat across from her as she told me more about the frogs and how they wore little hats so the wind would not mess up their hair. She was like that, always weaving fantasy into the fabric of the everyday. There was no warning, no flicker of something wrong, no shadow on her face, no change in her breathing. 1 minute we were talking about frogs, and the next she went quiet. I remember the sound of her fork falling first, a soft clatter on the tile, then the way her head tilted oddly to the left, her mouth twitching like she was trying to speak but couldn't. Her eyes rolled upward just slightly, not all the way, but enough to jolt me to my feet. I rushed to her, calling her name, my voice already tight with panic. She began to seize as I caught her in my arms. Her body stiffened, then jerked violently, arms flailing, legs kicking at angles that no child should ever bend. I lowered her carefully to the kitchen floor, grabbed a dish towel to cushion her head, and fumbled for my phone. My fingers would not work right. It took 2 tries before I got the screen to unlock. I pressed the emergency dial and gave our address to the dispatcher as clearly as I could, trying to stay calm even as I watched my daughter's face tighten with unnatural strain. The dispatcher was calm, composed, trained to handle frantic parents like me. She asked how long the seizure had lasted. I told her it had just started. She asked if we had the emergency medication. I said yes, and grabbed it from the cabinet while she stayed on the line. I had done this before, administered it, waited, watched, prayed. Usually it helped. Usually she stopped shaking within a minute or two, but not this time. I injected the dose and whispered to Emily, telling her she was okay, that help was coming, that I was right there. Her limbs were slowing but not stopping. Her lips had turned pale. Her eyes blinked but did not seem to focus on anything. I wanted to scoop her up and carry her to the hospital myself, but I knew better. She needed oxygen, monitoring, professional care. I needed to wait for the ambulance. I needed to trust that they would be there quickly. The dispatcher told me the paramedics were close, maybe 2 or 3 minutes out. She told me to keep talking to Emily, to stay calm, to keep the area around her clear. I had done everything right. I followed every step they taught us at the pediatric neurology clinic. I told myself over and over that it would be okay. Then the minutes passed, and no one came. I ran to the front door and flung it open. I stood on the porch barefoot in the morning sun, heart hammering, ears straining for the sound of sirens. When I finally heard them, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. I stepped out onto the driveway, scanning the street, waiting to see flashing lights pull around the corner. But the lights never came. Instead, the sound hovered at the edge of the neighborhood. I realized with a sickening twist that they were not getting closer. They had stopped. I ran down the street, down the hill toward the gated entrance of Oakwood Meadows. The sirens were still active, pulsing in and out, but the vehicle was not moving. As I reached the bottom of the street, I could see the ambulance clearly now, parked just outside the gate, and in front of it stood Karen. She was not waving them in. She was not opening the gate. She was standing there like a statue, arms folded, back rigid, expression unreadable, even from a distance. For a second, I could not process what I was seeing. It did not compute. Karen was always difficult, but surely she was not stopping emergency medical services. Surely no one would do that. Not even her. I sprinted the last stretch of sidewalk and reached the gate, breathless. The paramedics were arguing with her. One of them held a radio, the other gesturing toward the keypad. Karen's voice was calm and infuriatingly slow. I could not hear her exact words at first, only the tone, detached, dismissive. I shouted her name. She turned her head and gave me that same smile she had used when fining us for sidewalk chalk, cold, controlled. I told her Emily was dying. I told her to open the gate. Karen replied that unauthorized entry by service vehicles was against community policy, that the access code had expired last month and needed to be reissued, that she could not allow non-resident entry without verification. Her words were so absurd I almost laughed. Almost. I told her to move. She said she was just following procedure. The paramedic nearest me looked ready to shove past her, but she raised a hand, not to block him, but to indicate she would report him for breach of community security if he tried. I could not believe what I was witnessing. I screamed again that my daughter was dying, that every second counted, that she could be losing oxygen. I begged her. I pleaded. I cursed. Nothing moved her. Nothing stirred that shell of false order she had built around herself. Time passed. I felt it like a tide pulling me under. I thought of Emily on the floor. I thought of her little hands curling, her lips trembling, her lungs struggling. And I knew then with horrible certainty that something irreversible was happening, and no one was stopping it, not even the woman who could. The paramedic stepped forward again, and this time he tried to move around her. He was a young man, maybe in his early 30s, sweating under the weight of his equipment bag and the pressure of every passing second. He looked exhausted already, but determined. Karen shifted her stance to block him. She did not raise her voice, but the words came out like a judge issuing a sentence. You need to wait for verification. That is standard procedure. This is private property. The words hung in the air like smoke. The other medic, a woman with a calm but tight expression, looked back at the driver of the ambulance who was already reaching for his radio. She called in their status, said they were delayed at a locked gate, obstruction by a resident, requested immediate police support. Her voice was steady, but urgent. Karen stood there, arms crossed, her jaw rigid with purpose. Her whole body radiated the kind of authority that does not come from strength, but from the sheer force of belief in one's own righteousness. She believed she was right, not just technically right, but morally. That was what made it so much worse. I was still catching my breath as I reached them. My feet were raw from running barefoot across the sidewalk. I pushed past the edge of the hedges lining the road and came to a full stop, nearly collapsing under the weight of helplessness and disbelief. Move. I said it as clearly and forcefully as I could. Not a scream this time, not a plea. Just a command. Move, Karen. My daughter is dying. She turned toward me slowly, as if I were interrupting a very important meeting. Her expression was unchanged. She looked at me like I was the one causing a disturbance, like I was an unruly guest refusing to respect someone else's home. I told you before, the vehicle is not authorized. She gestured toward the ambulance with one hand. We cannot allow access without proper documentation. This is a gated community. We have rules for a reason. Those words, we have rules for a reason. I heard them, and I felt something inside me fracture. It was the kind of break that does not make a sound. It happens somewhere deeper than bone. A snap of trust. A collapse of belief in the idea that people will, at the very least, do what is right when it truly matters. One of the medics spoke up again. He was more forceful now. He told her they had legal right to enter in an emergency. That federal law allowed emergency vehicles access in life-threatening situations, and if she continued to obstruct, she could be held personally liable. He said they were going in whether she liked it or not. Karen did not step aside. She took out her phone. She said she was calling security. There is no security, I said. Just you. Just you standing between my daughter and the help she needs. Her lips tightened. She told me I was being emotional, that I was escalating the situation, that if anything happened, it would be on me for not registering the emergency protocol in advance. I wanted to hit something. I wanted to scream until the earth cracked open. Instead, I looked at the keypad beside the gate. I thought maybe I could enter the code myself, but I did not have it. The code had been changed weeks ago without notice. Karen said it was for security. We had asked for the new one, but never received a response. She had said it was being re-evaluated. The medics were now debating whether to scale the fence. It was not high, but they had gear. The woman called in again, saying they were still blocked. Dispatch said police were en route. Emily could not wait for the police. I looked at Karen and told her if Emily died, I would hold her responsible. I said it without shaking. I wanted her to know the full weight of it. I wanted her to hear it and feel something. She did not blink. She told me that tragedies were unfortunate, but that chaos could not be allowed to rule. Tragedies, that was the word she used. Like it was an accident. Like this moment was not one she had chosen. Then finally, the second medic made a decision. He handed his partner the gear bag, stepped back, and vaulted the gate with both hands. He landed on the other side, staggered for a second, then took off running up the hill toward our house. The woman buzzed dispatch again and followed, slipping through a narrow gap in the gate where it met the hedge line. She was smaller and could fit. Karen shouted after them, saying they would be fined, that they were violating the community charter. I did not hear the rest. I was already running. I left Karen there, standing like a monument to futility, her phone still in her hand, her voice rising behind me. I ran up the street, my lungs burning, my mind spinning in fragmented flashes of memory. Emily in her pajamas, her giggle at breakfast, her face as the seizure took hold. When I reached the front door, the medic had already begun chest compressions. His partner had radioed for more support. I stood in the doorway and watched, unable to move. My knees buckled and I collapsed against the wall, gasping, praying, whispering Emily's name over and over. I do not know how long it took before the other emergency responders arrived. Maybe it was 3 minutes, maybe 10. Time had stopped moving in a straight line. They swarmed in. Oxygen tanks, monitors, tools, hands moving in precision, voices clipped and urgent. They worked with skill and speed and everything they had, but none of it was enough. None of it could undo the time that had been lost at that gate. Outside, I could still hear Karen talking to someone. She had not followed us. She had not come to check if Emily was alive. She had returned to her porch, clipboard in hand, documenting the unauthorized gate entry and planning her next newsletter. I stayed on the floor while they worked. I did not move. I did not speak. I just waited for someone to tell me that she was breathing again. That moment never came. Emily was still warm when they told me she was gone. The words were soft, clinical even, spoken by the lead paramedic in the voice they must teach them in training, the kind meant to convey both truth and sympathy in one breath, but there was no way to coat it. No phrasing or tone could dull the edge of what he was saying. Emily had no pulse. They had done everything they could. She had passed during the seizure. It had been too long without oxygen. Her little heart had given out. I did not answer right away. I could not speak. I was sitting on the kitchen floor, legs stretched out in front of me, palms flat on the cold tile, back pressed against the cabinet. I stared at the corner of the room where her juice box still sat on the counter, straw poking out at an awkward angle, condensation pooling beneath it. The smell of toasted bread lingered in the air, sickening now, like something burned and sweet. Someone had stepped on her picture book during the commotion. The pages were bent and creased. A stuffed rabbit lay on its side beside the living room rug, one ear folded in on itself. The medic apologized again, but his voice sounded far away. I was underwater. Everything was muffled. Movement slowed around me. The team began packing up their equipment. One of them made a call to the coroner. Another checked in with dispatch to confirm protocol. There was an order to it all, a rhythm of practiced motion. They had done this before, but never to my daughter. Never to my little girl who had been alive and full of stories just hours ago. I reached for her hand. One of the medics hesitated but did not stop me. I wrapped her fingers in mine and leaned close. Her skin was cooling but not yet cold. Her face was peaceful, her lips slightly parted, her lashes casting shadows across her cheeks. I could still see the girl who had made me laugh that morning, who had asked if frogs could wear sunglasses if they flew too close to the sun. I kissed her forehead. I did not cry yet. That came later. What I felt in that moment was not grief but something hollow and stunned, an absence so deep it felt like gravity had shifted. Outside, the neighborhood had started to stir. People came out of their houses, drawn by the ambulance and police cruiser now parked at the curb. A few stood on porches, arms folded across chests, talking in hushed tones. Others lingered near their driveways, pretending to check the mail or sweep the steps while watching every move being made. I saw Mrs. Hernandez from 2 doors down holding her little dog in her arms, her face pale. She caught my eye and gave me a small nod of understanding, of sorrow. I wanted to look away but found myself locked in place. And then there was Karen. She stood farther back, on the opposite side of the cul-de-sac, just outside her property line. Her clipboard was gone, but her arms were crossed again, her posture rigid. I could not read her expression. It was not smug, not exactly, but it was not regret either. It was the look of someone determined to outlast discomfort. She watched everything but moved for nothing. A police officer approached her. I saw them speak. She pointed toward the gate, then toward my house. Her hands moved with precision, explaining, clarifying, deflecting. The officer took notes. I went to the door. One of the medics tried to stop me gently, said I should sit down, said there would be a lot of forms to fill out. I nodded but kept walking. I opened the door and stepped outside. The air was heavy. The sun was too bright. Everything looked exactly the same and completely foreign. My neighborhood. My street. The concrete where Emily had once drawn suns and hopscotch lines and monsters with flower crowns. The tree we had hung a swing from last summer. All of it unchanged, and yet somehow stained now, tainted by what had happened. Karen was still talking to the officer when she noticed me. She paused, adjusted her stance, and smoothed her blouse with both hands. I walked toward her. Every step felt slow. I was aware of the eyes on me, the neighbors, the officers, the medics loading equipment into the truck. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to explain or defend, or offer something resembling sympathy. I raised my hand before she could. Do not say a word. She hesitated. I said it again. Do not speak to me. Ever. The officer looked between us. Karen looked ready to protest, but something in my face must have stopped her. She pressed her lips together and stepped back. I turned to the officer and asked if we were done here. He said they would need a full statement. I said I would give one after I buried my daughter. Not before. Back inside, the coroner had arrived. I signed what needed to be signed. I answered questions. I gave them permission to move Emily's body. The paramedics stayed for a while longer, quietly packing and checking with dispatch. One of them placed a hand on my shoulder before leaving. I do not remember what he said, just the touch, the weight of it. I sat in the hallway for what felt like hours. Eventually Jenna arrived. I did not call her. The police had. She came in through the front door, eyes wide, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, hospital ID badge still clipped to her scrubs. Her shoes squeaked against the tile as she ran toward me. I stood just in time to catch her as she collapsed into my arms. She was already crying, big, wrenching sobs that shook her body. She asked where Emily was. I told her. We held each other like drowning survivors clinging to driftwood. When she pulled back, she asked how it had happened. I told her everything. Her expression changed as I spoke. Shock first, then horror, then something else, a heat, a rage I had never seen in her before. She said nothing for a long time. Then she asked where Karen was. I told her. She stepped toward the door. I stopped her, told her it would not change anything now. She looked at me, fists clenched, jaw locked, and then she broke, dropped to her knees on the kitchen floor and screamed. Later, we sat together on the couch in silence. The coroner had taken Emily. The house was empty, too quiet. Every corner of it reminded us of her. Her voice, her steps, her laughter. We did not speak for a long time. When we finally did, it was only to say her name. Emily. Over and over again. As if speaking it might bring her back. It had been 5 minutes. 5 minutes between the moment I first saw the ambulance idling behind the locked gate and the moment the paramedic told me she was gone. 5 minutes of shouting, of pleading, of trying to push past a woman who valued regulations more than a child's life. I kept hearing the number over and over again in my head. 5 minutes. Just 5. That was all it took for everything to break. We stayed in the house after they took Emily away. I do not remember much about those hours. I remember the silence, thick and awful, as if the walls themselves were afraid to make a sound. I remember sitting on the floor in her room, next to the corner where she had arranged her stuffed animals for the picnic she never got to have. There was the rabbit, bear, owl, and the newest one, a zebra with sequins on its hooves. They were all waiting, just as she had left them, frozen in time. I did not move them. I did not even touch the blanket she had laid out. I just sat there, staring, wishing it had all been a dream I could wake up from. Jenna moved through the house like a ghost. She barely spoke. She folded and unfolded the same dish towel for nearly an hour before finally throwing it away. She would get up, walk into a room, stop, and stand there for minutes without saying anything. Then she would leave again. She called her mother and could not get the words out. When she finally managed to say Emily's name, her knees gave out and she slid to the floor, curling into herself while her mother sobbed on the other end of the line. I sat next to her, unable to offer anything except my hand, which she gripped so tightly I thought my bones would break. The police came back later that day, not the same ones from earlier. A detective this time, older, more composed, wearing a plain grey suit and holding a leather-bound notebook. He introduced himself, said he was very sorry for our loss, and asked if we would be willing to answer some questions. We said yes. What else could we say? He asked about the timeline. He asked when we called 911, what we told them, how long the seizure lasted. He asked about the ambulance, the delay, the gate. He asked if anyone had directly stopped the paramedics from entering. Jenna's hands clenched again when I told him Karen's name. She wanted to speak, but I asked her to let me finish. I explained everything, every moment, every word I could remember. He nodded as he took notes, sometimes asking me to repeat a detail or clarify a time. I did not leave anything out. When I told him what Karen had said about rules, he stopped writing for a moment. He looked up at me, as if seeing me for the first time, and then wrote something quickly and closed his notebook. He told us the matter would be investigated, that he would be speaking with Karen, with the paramedics, with the dispatcher. He told us he could not promise anything, not yet, but that what we had described was deeply troubling. As he left, Jenna asked if we should get a lawyer. He paused at the door, nodded once, and said it would be wise. That night we did not sleep. We lay in bed with the lights on, staring at the ceiling. Every sound from outside made my heart race. The air conditioner, the creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of a car passing down the street. Everything felt foreign. Everything felt wrong. At some point, Jenna turned toward me and whispered that she had checked on Emily in the middle of the night. She had been breathing softly, so peacefully. She had kissed her cheek and gone back to bed. She had no idea that would be the last time. I told her I had done the same, that I had looked in on her just after midnight. We both had, and still, it had not been enough. In the morning, the first official message from the HOA arrived, an email, formatted with the same template Karen used for monthly updates. No mention of what had happened, no acknowledgement of Emily, no apology. Just a reminder about upcoming lawn inspections and a note about vehicle code compliance. I stared at the email for a long time before deleting it, without replying. But that was not the end of it. Later that afternoon, I found a folded letter in our mailbox. It was from Karen, printed on HOA stationery, typed, signed at the bottom with her precise, looping cursive. She expressed condolences, but only in the most detached, formal way possible. She referred to the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding. She stated that emergency access policies were being reviewed for potential adjustment in the future. She offered no responsibility, no remorse. She included a printed copy of the gate access policy, with several sections highlighted in yellow, as if to emphasize that she had followed protocol. Jenna tore the letter in half the moment she saw it. Then she tore it again, and again, until the pieces were so small they looked like confetti. She gathered them into her hands and walked outside. I followed her, not knowing what she planned to do. She crossed the street, stood at the edge of Karen's perfect lawn, and let the pieces fall into the grass. Then she turned and walked back into the house without a word. The next morning, a neighbor stopped by, Mrs. Hernandez. She brought a basket of muffins and a handwritten card. She stood on our porch, eyes red, hands trembling. She told us how sorry she was, how much she had loved seeing Emily ride her bike up and down the street, how her dog, Max, would always bark happily when Emily waved. She stayed only a few minutes, just long enough to let us know that not everyone in the neighborhood was blind to what had happened. Others came too, slowly, cautiously, as if unsure whether they would be welcome. They brought flowers, cards, casseroles. Some said nothing at all, just stood in our yard and cried. The support was small but real. It helped, in its own way, but it could not undo what had been done. I thought about calling the news, about writing everything down and sending it to every paper, every station, every person with a platform. I wanted people to know. I wanted them to see what rules and power and pride had cost us. But I did not yet have the words. I could barely think. I was still trapped in those 5 minutes. Still hearing the sirens, still watching the ambulance sit motionless behind that iron gate while my daughter lay on the floor unable to breathe. We spent the rest of that day making arrangements, calling the funeral home, picking out a dress, choosing a photo. Every decision felt like a betrayal, like we were admitting she was not coming back. 5 minutes, that was all it took, and Karen had taken every second of it. The days that followed blurred into one another, a colorless smear of phone calls, appointments, and long stretches of silence. Our house became a shell, a museum of the life we had before. Emily's shoes remained by the front door. Her backpack hung from the hook near the hallway. Her toothbrush still leaned against the edge of the sink. Everything was where she left it, untouched, suspended. I could not bear to move any of it. Neither could Jenna. The funeral came quickly. There were forms, decisions, details to sort. Friends and family helped, stepping in when we could not find the strength. Jenna's parents arrived the day after we called them, bringing with them grief too large for words. My own brother flew in from out of state and stayed with us in the guest room. He was quiet most of the time, only speaking when he absolutely had to, but he made himself useful. He kept the coffee pot full. He picked up people from the airport. He stood by me during the services like a silent pillar. The church was packed. I did not know Emily had touched so many lives. Her classmates came, guided by parents who looked at us with wide, broken expressions. Teachers we barely knew offered soft hugs and pressed our hands. The principal, who had only met Emily a few times, cried through his entire eulogy. Jenna and I sat in the front row, our hands clasped so tightly it left nail marks in our palms. When it was time to speak, we did not. We had written something, a short letter to our daughter, but we could not say it aloud. A close friend read it for us. Afterward, people trickled through our house in waves. Some brought food, others brought photos, drawings, little stories about Emily. These small gifts hurt, but they helped. It was proof that she had existed not just for us, but for the world. That her absence left more than just a hole in one home. It left echoes. We did not see Karen at the funeral. We did not expect to. A few days later, a package arrived from the HOA. I knew the envelope before I opened it. The logo at the top, the formal letterhead, the plastic sleeve containing documents. But it was not a sympathy card or a community-wide message of support. It was a notice, a formal statement from the board addressing the incident that occurred at the front gate. It claimed a review had been conducted. It acknowledged the delay in emergency vehicle access but stated that the procedures were followed in accordance with current HOA safety standards. It concluded that no disciplinary action would be pursued at this time, and thanked us for our understanding during this difficult time. I read the letter once, then again, slower. Jenna stood behind me, arms folded, reading over my shoulder. She said nothing when I finished. She walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up the trash bin, and dumped the letter inside. Then she looked at me and said, "We're suing." We found a lawyer the next morning. His name was Anthony Price, a lean, sharp-eyed man with a quiet voice and a look that suggested he had long since lost faith in the idea of accidental injustice. He came to the house, sat in our living room, and listened without interrupting. When we finished explaining everything, he leaned forward and asked one question. "Do you want revenge or accountability?" Jenna answered before I could. "We want to make sure this never happens to another family." He nodded. The lawsuit moved forward within days. Civil action, wrongful death, obstruction of emergency services. He told us it would be long, that HOA cases were complicated, that Karen would fight it, that she would not go quietly. She did not disappoint. By the end of that week, Karen had hired her own attorney and released a statement to the community. It was printed on pale blue paper and mailed to every home. In it, she described the incident as a tragic event and maintained that she had acted in full accordance with her duties as HOA president. She claimed that the paramedics were delayed due to a communication breakdown, not her actions, and accused certain individuals of spreading misinformation. The letter ended by reaffirming her commitment to the safety and order of Oakwood Meadows. I thought people might rally behind her, that the same neighbors who feared her citations and fines would fall in line, but they did not. Not all of them, at least. Mrs. Hernandez came by again and asked if she could share our story with her niece, who worked for a local news station. We gave her permission. A week later, the story aired. A brief segment at first. Then another. The headlines were brutal. Girl dies after HOA president blocks ambulance. Local community faces lawsuit after emergency, delayed by gated access. It spread quickly. Social media caught on. Comments poured in. Some people were outraged, others confused. A few defended Karen, citing property rights and protocol. But the vast majority demanded answers. Karen held a press conference on the steps of her house. A dozen neighbors stood behind her, the same people who always voted with her, who had helped her pass every bylaw, every new restriction. She wore a pale suit, her hair pulled into a tight knot. She began by saying how deeply saddened she was. She paused for effect. Then she explained at length how procedures had to be followed, how emergency personnel must have proper authorization, how the system was not designed for chaos. She never said Emily's name. Jenna watched from the couch, hands shaking, face unreadable. When the reporter asked Karen whether she regretted her actions, Karen said, "I regret that a tragedy occurred, but I followed the rules." That quote made national news. It played on the evening broadcasts and was shared on platforms across the country. People were furious. Petitions sprang up overnight. One called for Karen's resignation. Another demanded state legislation to limit HOA control during emergencies. By the next day, reporters camped outside the Oakwood Meadows gate. Residents had to show ID to get through. We received dozens of messages from families around the country, people who had lost children to medical complications, parents who had fought with HOAs over similar issues, paramedics who told us stories of being blocked, delayed, harassed. It became clear that our story was not just our story. It was a thread in a larger pattern. And yet Karen remained unmoved. She stayed behind her gate. She issued statements. She refused interviews. At the next HOA meeting, held virtually due to the media frenzy, she read from a prepared speech and muted every resident who tried to interrupt her. She ignored requests for a vote of no confidence. She shut down discussion about her resignation. But something had shifted. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began to speak out. One man shared footage from his doorbell camera showing Karen arguing with the paramedics at the gate. Another released old emails showing how Karen had changed the emergency access codes without notifying residents. Evidence mounted. So did public pressure. We kept going. The legal process churned slowly, but our lawyer remained steady. Jenna worked with a local advocacy group to push for policy changes in city zoning laws. I started writing, documenting every step of our experience. We were not just grieving anymore. We were building something from the pieces left behind, something that might matter, something Emily would be proud of. It took only 1 week after Emily's funeral for Oakwood Meadows to begin fracturing. The fault lines had always been there, quiet and buried beneath clipped hedges and polite nods at mailbox clusters. But now they ran through every street, visible and widening. Some neighbors stood firmly behind us, others kept their distance. A few clung to Karen as if proximity to her power could shield them from whatever reckoning was coming. The next HOA meeting was set for the following Monday night. It was usually held in the community center, a beige stucco building with folding chairs and bad lighting, but the press attention made that impossible. Karen moved the meeting online and locked it behind a password. Jenna and I were both still listed as homeowners in good standing, so we received the access code along with the meeting agenda, which included no mention of Emily, the lawsuit, or the emergency protocols. Instead, it highlighted lawn care reminders, summer pool hours, and an item labeled Gate Procedure Clarification. We logged in from separate rooms, both needing the space. I sat in the kitchen, laptop propped on the counter. Jenna stayed in the bedroom. The meeting began with Karen's face filling the screen, her expression as composed as ever. She wore a coral-colored blouse and a thin gold necklace. Behind her, a tall bookcase stood filled with HOA binders and legal manuals. I doubted there was a single novel among them. She opened the meeting with the usual call to order. Then she read the minutes from the last meeting. Not once did she mention the death of a child who had lived 4 houses from her own. Not once did she say Emily's name. During the open forum portion, residents were supposed to be allowed to speak, but when the first homeowner unmuted and asked about emergency vehicle access, Karen immediately muted him. She told everyone that questions on legal matters would not be discussed due to ongoing litigation. When another neighbor tried to raise the issue again, she ended the open forum entirely and moved into what she called committee updates. I watched Jenna's face in a small window on the screen. Her jaw was clenched. Her shoulders were tight. She was holding herself still, but I could tell she was barely containing it. When Karen ended the meeting without a single acknowledgement of what had happened, Jenna slammed her laptop shut so hard I thought she had broken it. The next day, the neighborhood group chat exploded. People were furious. Some demanded a special meeting to vote on Karen's removal. Others argued it was too soon or too complicated, or legally impossible under the bylaws. That word kept coming up. Bylaws. The thing Karen hid behind like a wall. She had built them up so carefully, so methodically, that no one seemed to know how to challenge her without getting buried in process. One resident, a retired attorney named Brian Pierce, began dissecting the HOA documents. He posted a long thread detailing how a vote of no confidence could be initiated with a petition signed by at least 35% of the homeowners. He offered to draft the petition and help coordinate signatures. Within hours, people were printing copies, knocking on doors, passing them from porch to porch. I signed it without hesitation. So did Jenna. So did most of the neighbors on our street. But others refused. Some said they did not want to get involved. Others whispered that they feared retaliation. Fines, inspections, petty punishments. Karen issued another statement that afternoon. This time, she accused certain residents of creating division within the community and undermining the stability that the HOA had worked so hard to maintain. She called the petition an act of personal vengeance and reminded everyone that any false statements or harassment would be met with legal action. Her message closed with a reminder about the upcoming community garage sale. It felt like we were living in 2 separate neighborhoods, one where a little girl had died because help could not get to her in time, and another where that girl had never existed, and everything could go back to normal as long as people kept their lawns neat and their complaints quiet. The vote effort stalled after that. Not enough signatures. People were scared. Some genuinely believed that Karen had simply made a mistake. Others did not want to be seen as choosing sides. Jenna took it hard. She had believed, as I had, that once people understood what happened, they would rise up, that justice was something communities would fight for together. But Oakwood Meadows was not built for fighting. It was built for conformity. We considered moving. We talked about it late at night, voices low, our hands intertwined under the blankets. Jenna said she could not walk past the gate every day knowing what had happened there. I said I could not walk past Emily's room without feeling like I had failed her. We looked at listings. We even visited a few places. But nothing felt right. Nothing felt like home. Our house still held her voice. Her drawings were still taped to the fridge. Her books lined the shelf in the hallway. Her world lived here, even if she no longer did. One morning, Jenna surprised me. She had written a letter to the city council. It was long, filled with details and timelines, witness names and excerpts from our lawsuit. She did not ask them to take sides. She asked them to investigate the ways HOA policies intersected with emergency services. She included photographs, gate schematics, a copy of the 911 transcript. She sent it not just to the council, but to the mayor's office, the county board, even the local fire department chief. A week later, a city representative reached out. He asked to meet. He told us that our letter had prompted concern, that there had been complaints before about gated communities obstructing emergency access, but none had ended like this. He said the council was considering drafting a new ordinance that would require all gated neighborhoods to maintain 24-hour remote access for emergency vehicles, no exceptions. It was not justice, not yet, but it was something. The news media returned. A new wave of interest stirred. Reporters asked us for interviews. Jenna agreed. I joined her. We spoke calmly, clearly, about what had happened. We told them about the gate, about Karen, about the 5 minutes we lost. We did not yell. We did not beg. We just told the truth. People listened. Letters began arriving from strangers, parents who had lost children, nurses, paramedics, HOA members from other communities. Some shared similar stories. Some just sent condolences. One woman wrote that her daughter's school had created a scholarship in Emily's name. Another family planted a tree for her. We were not healed, not even close, but we were no longer alone. Karen remained president. The lawsuit moved slowly, tangled in procedures and motions and scheduled depositions. But we were patient. We had time. We would not stop. Not until someone stood up and admitted what she had done. We knew what had happened. So did she. So did everyone else. It began with a single post. Jenna made it late one night after another restless hour of pacing the hallway outside Emily's room. I found her in the living room, legs tucked under her, phone in her lap, eyes swollen from crying but steady with purpose. She said she was tired of waiting, tired of whispering. She said it was time people saw everything. She posted a photo of Emily. Not one of the polished school portraits or posed family shots. It was one I had taken just a few weeks earlier, the two of them baking cookies. Emily had flour on her nose and was sticking her tongue out at the camera. Behind her, Jenna was laughing, her arm mid-motion with a spoonful of dough. That moment, frozen in time, carried more truth than any headline ever could. Below the photo, Jenna wrote out everything, not in legal language, not in clipped, sterile terms. She told the story as a mother who had held her daughter's hand as her life slipped away. She explained the seizure, the 911 call, the ambulance at the gate. She described Karen in careful, exacting detail, not cruelly, just honestly. The way she stood, the way she refused, the way she chose order over urgency. She wrote about the 5 minutes. She ended with a single sentence. Her name was Emily. She was 7 years old, and she died because someone decided the rules were more important than her life. She posted it on her public profile. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. By morning, national outlets were calling. Radio stations, newspapers, morning shows. Our phones lit up non-stop. We took turns answering while the other tried to sleep, though neither of us got much rest. By noon, the story was trending on nearly every major social media platform. A hashtag started by a teacher from Emily's school spread like wildfire. Justice for Emily. People were angry, not just at what had happened, but at the familiarity of it. They told stories in the comments. Stories of delayed ambulances, of overreaching HOAs, of bureaucracy that suffocated compassion. Emergency workers chimed in with their own frustrations. Some had been yelled at for parking too close to mailboxes. Others had been fined for moving planters to make room for stretchers. It was not just about us anymore. It was about the systems that allowed what happened to happen in the first place. The outcry reached the mayor's office within a day. By the next week, city officials were drafting a proposal requiring gated communities to provide full-time emergency override access, not just codes that could expire or be changed without notice. Local news crews came to our street. They stood near the gate where Emily's help had been stopped and reported live. They interviewed neighbors, some of whom spoke candidly, others anonymously. More than one admitted they had feared Karen, that they had accepted her rules because they were easier to follow than fight. One man, whose house sat at the very end of the block, told a reporter that he had once seen Karen block a fire truck from entering because the driver refused to fill out a clipboard form she insisted he sign. He had thought it was absurd but forgot about it the next day. Now he said he wished he had spoken up then. Karen responded eventually. It came through a lawyer this time, a polished statement released to the press. It was carefully worded, full of vague regret and legal positioning. She referred to Emily only as the minor involved. She called the delay at the gate an unfortunate procedural miscommunication. She reminded everyone that she had acted within the bounds of her authority. She ended by saying she hoped the community could heal and move forward. People did not forget that sentence. Heal and move forward. as if the pain had an expiration date, as if what happened could be placed in a box and left behind. Jenna and I did not respond publicly. We did not need to. The response spoke for itself. The petition to remove Karen, once stalled and doubted, surged past the threshold in a matter of hours. Over 70% of the homeowners signed. Some came to our house just to apologize in person before adding their names. A few cried at the doorstep. One woman who had voted for Karen every year since moving in said she could no longer look at herself in the mirror unless she did something. The HOA board had no choice. A special meeting was scheduled. The same neighbors who had once feared Karen's clipboard now stood in line to vote her out. When the results came in, they were overwhelming. She was removed from her position that night. But she was not gone. Karen filed a defamation suit against us within the week. She claimed Jenna's post had ruined her reputation, cost her opportunities, and led to harassment. Her attorney demanded we take down every post, issue a retraction, and pay damages. We laughed when we read it. Not because it was funny, but because it was so ridiculous it felt like fiction. Our lawyer responded with a countersuit and filed motions to have hers dismissed. The legal battle was still far from over. The civil suit we had filed continued through discovery. Karen was deposed in a quiet conference room downtown. Jenna attended. I stayed home that day, unsure if I could stay calm if I saw her. When Jenna came back, she looked hollow but calm. She said Karen never apologized. Not once. She said Karen answered every question with practiced precision, but when asked whether she regretted her actions, she paused. For a long time. Then she said she regretted that the situation had been taken out of context. That was enough for us. In the meantime, something unexpected happened. People started asking how they could help. They wanted to donate, to support, to carry some part of the weight with us. We did not know what to say at first. We did not want sympathy money. But one night, Jenna brought up the idea of a foundation. Not for us, for other families. For emergency responders. For kids like Emily who might need help faster than a gate code allows. We called it 5 More Minutes. The foundation began as a small page online. Nothing fancy. Just a mission and a form for contributions. Within weeks, we had raised enough to provide override keypads to several neighborhoods in our county. We partnered with fire departments and EMS directors to identify risk areas. We began pushing for statewide legislation. Jenna testified before a subcommittee. I watched from the back row, my hands shaking with pride. We were still broken, still grieving. That would never change. But we were moving. Not forward in the way Karen had meant, sweeping it under the rug. Forward in a way that honored our daughter. That made her story matter. And everywhere we went, we said her name. Emily. We said it again and again, so no one could forget. There is a moment every morning, just before I open my eyes, when I forget she is gone. In that quiet space between sleep and waking, I can almost hear her voice again, laughing down the hallway, calling for cereal, asking me to find her missing sock. I see her bunny rabbit lying crooked on the couch. I smell that sweet mix of shampoo and crayons that clung to her when she hugged me. For those few seconds, my world feels whole. Then I blink, and it all comes rushing back. The silence, the weight, the unfillable space where Emily used to be. I have stopped trying to outrun it. I let it in. Every day I let it in and try to carry it in a way that does not break me. Some days I do better than others. We visit her grave every Sunday. It is a small plot beneath a tree that flowers pink in the spring and burns orange in the fall. The cemetery is quiet, with a view of the hills beyond town. Jenna picks fresh flowers from our yard each week. Sometimes she arranges them in little bouquets that match the ones Emily used to make from weeds and dandelions. Other times, she just brings one single sunflower and lays it beside the stone. I sit with her in silence. We do not always speak. Sometimes we share memories. Sometimes we talk to Emily as if she is right there, listening. I like to believe she is. On the day we planted the tree, in her name at Willow Lane Elementary, the entire second-grade class came out in matching purple t-shirts. They had written notes and tied them to the branches with little pieces of ribbon. One boy told Jenna that Emily had given him the courage to wear glasses, even though he thought they made him look like a bug. Another girl whispered that Emily had once shared her cookie even when she only had one. These children carried pieces of her I never knew, and I was grateful for every one of them. The school invited us to speak at the dedication ceremony. Jenna stood behind the microphone, her hands steady, her voice strong. She told them about the 5 minutes, about the gate, about what it had cost. Then she told them about the world Emily saw, one filled with kindness, with make-believe creatures in rain boots, with rules that made space for joy rather than strangle it. She ended by saying that Emily had believed in helping people, and now we would help in her name. After the ceremony, a teacher told us that they had changed their emergency protocol. From now on, all staff had keys to every entrance. No one would ever be stuck outside when seconds mattered. Little by little, things were changing. The city passed the Emergency Access Ordinance. It required all private communities to provide remote override to local EMS and fire services, with a dedicated emergency liaison to ensure real-time support. The council voted unanimously. Several other counties followed soon after. A state senator reached out and asked to consult on a bill that would make it law across the entire state. Jenna sat across from him in his office, explaining how a child's life could be measured in minutes. He listened. The 5 More Minutes Foundation grew faster than we imagined. What started as a simple website became a full non-profit with a board of advisors, a volunteer network, and a mission that expanded beyond what we first envisioned. We funded emergency response equipment, built training programs for HOAs, and created a scholarship in Emily's name for students going into public health and emergency services. I gave a talk at one of the fundraisers. I had written it the night before, rewriting the last paragraph 5 times. When I stood at the podium, I looked out at a room filled with people who had never met Emily but knew her story. I told them she had taught me how to draw stars. I told them she once asked me if clouds could cry. I told them that she had only needed 5 more minutes, and someone had taken that away. But now, because of her, someone else's 5 minutes might be protected. After the talk, a woman approached me. She was a nurse. She had lost her own daughter years earlier in a different kind of tragedy. She said the pain never went away. But she also said that when you carry love with your grief, it becomes something else, something you can give to others. I think about that often. The legal battle with Karen dragged on, as expected. Her defamation suit was dismissed. Our civil case proceeded slowly through the courts, but with mounting evidence and public support, we were told the outcome looked promising. Depositions revealed inconsistencies in her account. Neighbors came forward. Records were subpoenaed. It became clear that the gate code had been changed without proper notice, that protocols had been rewritten selectively. That authority had been used not to serve but to dominate. Karen never apologized. Not to us, not to anyone. The last time I saw her was in court, during a preliminary hearing. She wore grey, no jewelry. Her posture was perfect. Her expression was unreadable. But I looked closely, and for the first time I saw something flicker. Not guilt, not sorrow, but fear. The fear of a person whose power no longer protected her. We left before the hearing ended. There was nothing more we needed to see. At home, Emily's room remains untouched. We do not keep it as a shrine. We go in often. We sit on her bed. We read her books. Sometimes I lie back and close my eyes and try to hear her laugh again. I can almost remember every note of it. On her dresser sits a small wooden box with some of her drawings, her favorite bracelet, a button she once said looked like a pirate's coin. Jenna framed a quote and hung it above her bed. It reads, "We do not forget. We build from what remains." I used to think that grief was a hole, a bottomless space that swallowed everything. But now I know it is a shadow that travels with you. It stretches and shifts but never leaves. And even within that shadow, there can be light. We miss her with every breath. We remember her in every act. And every time we speak her name, we give her back to the world. Her name was Emily. She was our daughter. And because of her, the next child who needs help might just get those 5 more minutes.